Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to our lesson on teenage physical development. So our objectives and standards to analyze theories of adolescence and explain physical development in teenagers. And we have our standards there, the national standards, so please take a look at them. We have a couple of vocabulary words here. Initiation rites. An individual is admitted to a new status or position after certain ceremonies or rituals. Puberty, reproduction is possible as sexual maturation occurs at the end of childhood. Menarche is the first menstrual period. Spermarchy is when males achieve ejaculation during this period. And asynchrony is uneven growth or maturation of body parts. And I just want to make a note here that, again, this, as we talk about some of these physical changes, some of them you are most likely aware of or know about. But, it's important that we discuss these because it's important to learn about them because they do impact psychology and mental thinking of teenagers as well. So that's why we're discussing many of these terms that you may or may not be familiar or comfortable with. So think about this. How do physical changes impact teenagers? So many of you are teenagers yourself. So again, just think about, how do physical changes impact the way you think and feel? Excuse me. And our essential question, what physical changes occur during the teenage years? Okay, so an introduction to adolescence. The teenage or adolescence years can be complicated. It is the time period between childhood and adulthood, and there are mixed abilities and mixed responsibilities that occur. It also prepares teenagers for adult responsibilities. Now, initiation rites that mark admission into adulthood include turning 16, like getting your driver's license, or 18 when you are officially an adult. And there are also some informal celebrations, such as graduating from high school, maybe getting your first job, bar or bat mitzvahs for those who are Jewish, maybe a quinceañera for those of Hispanic backgrounds. So those are just some of the informal celebrations that can occur as well that kind of usher you into adulthood. Adolescence Theories. In 1904, George Stanley Hall presented his pioneer theory on adolescence. And he sees adolescence as a transitional stage. He also viewed it as a time of stress, and I put a cage up there because one of the ways that Hall explained it is, imagine a lion being trapped in a cage, wanting freedom, but not sure when to expect that freedom. So that's kind of how he saw teenagers or adolescents, is how teenagers are kind of trapped in this cage sometimes, and they want the freedom, but they're not sure when to expect freedom or what's going to happen once they get that freedom. So it's a very confusing time and stressful time is what he was getting at. Now, many psychologists agreed with this viewpoint, but later on some began to disagree. In the 1920s and 1930s, Margaret Mead discovered that the teenage years can be enjoyable in some cultures as well, and she stated that stress is not just inherent in teenagers, or teenagers are born with the stress as they come into this stage, but more it's a product of industrialized society. So our environment around us makes teenagers stressed. A report in 1988 reported that 11% of teenagers faced very serious problems. Others reported that they only had sporadic or problems here and there, while the rest did that they had a pretty healthy and happy experience during their teenage years. I myself, I know when I was a teenager, I know I faced many different stresses and complications that many of you have probably gone through as well. But I would say overall my teenage years were pretty happy as well. I don't think I really faced anything too crazy. Again, I had some problems here and there, but for the most part, I had a pretty happy teenage experience. Now, the adolescent years may not have enormous problems, but there are stresses. So now we want to go through, major life changes, but everyone faces stresses as a teenager. Now, psychologist Robert Havinghurst reported in 1972 on developmental tasks that teenagers must accomplish in their teenage years. And I'm going to show you a list of them here. So he came up with these tasks that teenagers have to accomplish. Identifying masculine or feminine roles and accepting physical makeup, creating age-appropriate relationships with both sexes, males and females, They should become emotionally independent of adults and parents. They should learn that there's an assurance that they will one day be economically independent. So again, maybe getting your first job, or looking for a first job, or thinking about a future career. Again, preparing for and deciding on occupation or vocation. Um, Being able to develop cognitive skills for social competence. So again, holding a conversation, a mature adult conversation, and things like that. Accepting and understanding what's behavior, what's acceptable in behavior. Obviously, in the teenage years, we don't want teenagers at the age of 14 or 15 throwing temper tantrums in the grocery store. If they don't get a candy bar, their mom won't buy them. Again, there are some cases where that's happened. There's developmental delays, or special education needs, or things like that. But again, overall, most teenagers understand that's not acceptable for me to be throwing a temper tantrum in the grocery store because my mom won't buy me my favorite cereal. Marriage and family preparedness, so preparing for again, the future. And building values that are appropriate and harmonious. So again, building values that are acceptable to other people. Obviously, hopefully you don't think that robbing a bank and taking hostages, obviously you hopefully understand that stealing is wrong, or things like that. You don't think that stealing is okay, and that everybody should just accept that, because most people in society do not accept that. And tasks may be difficult for teenagers to achieve, but they typically handle getting these tasks relatively easy. So teenage physical development. Puberty is a biological event that marks the end of childhood. There are a series of internal and external changes that occur from hormone triggers, and these patterns occur differently in girls and boys. Now, girls typically begin puberty between the ages of 8 and 10. Boys typically enter puberty between the ages of 9 and 16. Now, prior to puberty, girls and boys will experience what is known as a growth spurt. This includes a rapid growth of both height and weight. Girls begin to grow around age 12, and boys begin to grow around age 14. You can maybe remember when you were a kid or a teenager. I know when I was a teenager, my grandmother was saying to me all the time, "Oh my gosh, look how much you've grown." And I was like, "Really? I don't think I have." But you do begin to notice. Other people begin to notice that you grow. Typically over the summer, a lot of times over the summer, people will say when you come back to school, "Oh my gosh, you got so tall." I can remember that as a teenager as well. Now, weight begins to increase for girls around age 10, and this can sometimes make them look chubby. And this is also very true for boys, but boys will typically lose this weight during their growth spurt as they grow taller, and they'll grow thinner, where girls, sometimes the weight stays on, or girls will typically add it to their height as well. So it may spread out a little bit more. So let's talk about female development. So females grow as much as 2 to 3.5 inches a year. They also see their hips and breasts begin to fill out, along with pubic hair. And the typical teenage girl will see her first menstrual period, or menarche, between the ages of 10 and 17. I know some of this may be uncomfortable, but it's important to discuss to understand our psychological development. So 12 to 18 months will pass before her periods will become regular, and she can conceive a child. Now, some pregnancies do occur immediately following menarche, but again, that's very rare. So male development. Large genitals and pubic hair begin to appear in boys around age 12, and their first ejaculation, or spermarchy, occurs around 12 and 13 years of age. Now, growth spurt for boys can occur 24 to 27 months later, and it can last for years. Boys can grow over a term of 3 years. They typically develop broad shoulders and a thicker trunk, meaning their legs get a little thicker and stronger after their growth spurt begins. And boys also develop more muscle tissue, and they develop a larger heart and lungs than girls. Their voices deepen, and hair begins to grow on their chest and face. Again, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, as many of you are probably experiencing this yourselves, or notice your own physical changes right now. Now, this rate and pattern of sexual maturation can widely differ. Girls begin to develop earlier than boys typically. But again, this period of growth and development can also be awkward for teenagers, okay? An uneven maturation of body parts, known as asynchrony, may cause hands or feet to be too big or too small. And eventually the body makes its adjustments to fix this. So if you have small hands when you're a teenager, and the rest of your body part, your feet are huge and your hands are small, your body will gradually adjust for this. But again, this is a very awkward point for many teenagers. It's very uncomfortable, thinking about these things, discussing these things, and looking at themselves with these things. So, it is an awkward stage for teenagers to go through. So growth reactions. Most teenagers are self-conscious about their development, and that's okay. It's a very new experience, a whole new different thing you're going through. So most teenagers are very self-conscious about their development. They typically want to be accepted by their peers. They want to be accepted by their friends. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to look awkward. And negative body images, so when they have a negative image of their body, it can lead to depression. Both sexes can become shy or embarrassed over maybe a lack of growth. And growth can also affect the personalities of teenagers as well. So we're looking at boys and girls here. So early development in boys, so boys who develop earlier than others, they typically become the sports heroes. They become, the athletic ones in high school or the jocks. And they typically are the social activity leaders. So they're leaders of clubs or organizations, things like that. They're usually, those types of people. Other teenage boys typically look up to them. And these are the types of boys that girls typically develop a crush on. And they're treated as more mature by adults as well. Now, boys who develop later are more self-confident and independent. They typically achieve higher social and occupational statuses later on, but some may display withdrawal, or they may become or use deviant behaviors such as breaking the rules or laws if they develop later. Now, girls who develop early may deal with embarrassment. Some may date older boys typically, and they may become bossy over people their own age. So girls who develop early may become a little more bossier of their friends or their peers, but they do tend to be more popular as well. Now, later developing girls tend to be less quarrelsome, so less willing to fight or get into arguments. They seem to be a little more easygoing, and they do easily get along with their peers as well. So attitudes towards sex. So different cultures around the world approach sex in different ways. Some cultures keep teenagers in the dark about it, while others encourage children to explore sexual play to encourage mature development later on. Now, sexual attitudes have changed within the past 30 or 40 years. Because there's an increased awareness of teens about sex, and we have sex education classes or in schools and government programs, teenage pregnancies have steadily fallen since 1991, but pregnancies still do occur as well. There's also a fear of sexually transmitted diseases, or STDs, and the fear of AIDS has also impacted teenage sexual behaviors. Again, some teenagers are learning about that. They'll be more cautious and practice safe sex when, if they do go into those types of behaviors. So again, we have seen a change in that in the last 30 to 40 years due to the impact of sexual education in schools and with support by the government and, and even religious and family groups as well. All right, so teenagers face different challenges and roles during the adolescent stage. Talked a lot about the initiation rites and the different responsibilities that teenagers begin to grow up with and grow on. Boys and girls definitely develop physically, and they develop at different rates. Girls typically develop quicker than boys. And teenagers also begin to have different views of themselves, their peers, and also other influences such as sexual relationships and sexual attitudes. Those things can impact them and can change as well. All right, so that's all I have for today. So if you would please try your best on the questions, and I'll see and talk to you later.